Hi. So in this video I'll continue the chapter on fingering from paragraph 34 from Carl Philipp Emanuel Bach's book Versuch über die wahre Art, das Klavier zu spielen. Einmal im Absteigen sehen wir bei Figur 7 mit dreierlei Fingerordnung. Da hier, wie bei C-Dur, auch kein halber Ton vorkommt, so sind sie alle drei gut und zu gebrauchen. Die, wo der Daumen in das Die eingesetzt wird, ist ungewöhnlicher als die anderen. So, here's A minor descending. And the three versions for each hand. And in this, for this scale, Bach doesn't provide any examples anymore, but based on the examples that he provided for C major, one could imagine the different contexts in which each of these fingerings might be used. And one could gather from what we've seen in the previous paragraphs that what we see here is Bach is not necessarily providing fingerings for the scale of A minor descending, but what he's doing is providing fingerings for musical ideas in the key of A which descend. And so, yeah, and then that's the function of these scales, rather than a simple fingering for scales. So they're fingerings for ideas, musical ideas in that same key as the scale is in. And if you note, what he says is the most unusual or least common is the one where the thumb is you inserted on the D, and that is the same as normal fingering would be for A minor. That may be interesting, it may not be, but it happens to be so. So, and the way those fingerings can be changed to the AC fingering system I've covered with C major, and there is no difference, so I won't go into that again. Anybody who's seen the last video will know how to use the AC fingering system to adjust those fingerings that Bach provides. G-Dur im Aufsteigen zeigt sich bei Figur 8 dreifach. Die mit ein Stern bezeichnete Applikatur ist die ungewöhnlichste. Die mittelste im Diskante und unterste im Basse gibt zu einer neuen Regelgelegenheit, welches so heißt: Das Überschlagen, welches mit dem zweiten Finger über den Daumen und mit dem dritten Finger über den vierten geschieht, hat seinen eigentlichen Nutzen bei Passagen ohne halben Töne. Allda geschieht es auch, wenn es nötig ist, oft hintereinander. Dann und wann geschieht es auch bei einem einzigen vorkommenden halben Ton. Man setzt in der Folge den Daumen oder vierten Finger gleich an dem halben Tone ein, und der zweite oder dritte Finger, welche dieses wegen ihrer vorzüglichen Länge bequem tun können, steigen auf diesen halben Ton. Hierauf nimmt ganz natürlich der Daumen nach der 33. Paragraph angeführten Regel seinen ihm zukommenden Platz ein. Das bei Figur 9 angeführte Exempel A könnte eine Ausnahme wider unsere Regel abgeben. Doch wird solches gewöhnlicher mit Untersetzung des Daumens B gespielt. Folglich ist das Überschlagen mit dem zweiten Finger über den Daumen auch in der gleichen Fällen brauchbarer als das mit dem dritten Finger über den vierten. Dieses Überschlagen bei einem vorkommenden halben Tone hat mich genötigt, diese Skala durch 2 Oktaven wegen der Folge durchzuführen. So, the first thing I want to say is that in this paragraph it's written the 32nd, the rule that's introduced in the 32nd paragraph. But I have looked at this and I have concluded that that is an error in the print, and what is meant to be there is the 33rd paragraph. So here's G major ascending in 2 octaves, and you can see where the asterisk is, that again what he says is the least common or most unusual fingering. On the right hand is that which would be normal fingering, which is the normal fingering of the G major scale. And I would suggest a possible implication of this would be that given these are not necessarily fingerings for scales, but fingerings to use when dealing with musical ideas in the key of G major ascending, that normal fingering, that's fingering that's used as in educational institutions, that people learn the G major scale with this fingering, that they do their exams playing scales with this fingering, that this is least useful or least commonly useful or usable or used in musical ideas in the key of G major. Hence Bach, how Bach classifies it. So that could be a possible implication to explain why he's saying normal fingering is the least common or the most unusual. And then there's the rule that he introduces. And this rule can be useful if you're dealing specifically with performance practice and you're performing, you're attempting to perform an early piece authentically. And I had this in college, where for the history part of the degree, when we were doing early music and early music performance practice, we had an assignment where there'd be a concert where we'd play a piece of early music, and we'd have to write a report where we say all those things that we did that make it authentic, or that deal with performance practice. And I was taking harpsichord lessons at the time with David Adams in Dublin, and we did a piece, and we did a lot of that element of fingering here, like of the third finger crossing over the fourth, or the second finger crossing over the thumb in succession. And this rule, along with those examples where you see the character of the nature of the music, in which the way it was grouped in trees, so in which this technique was applied, this rule gives further insight into the thinking of people in the day of how they'd apply it, in that it's actually used when there's only white keys, but it also can be used when there's a single black key. So that's further insight into how to apply it when you're faced with a piece of music and you want to finger it in that way authentically without using the thumb. So that rule will be an extra help in terms of really discovering, thinking like the way they would have taught in those days when fingering the music of those days. And if you look at the example A that he provides, where the third finger is crossing over the fourth finger, you can see with that example that he clarifies the rule even further, because the rule says except, if and when, it can also be used when there's a single black key occurring. And you could have people arguing, does he mean a passage that has only one black key in it, and if there's two black keys in the passage, then that cancels out, you can't use that technique? And so you can see from the example that when he says a single black key, he means a key that has white keys to the left and right of it, and that more black keys can occur in the passage. It's just two black keys in succession can't occur. But so it doesn't matter that there's more black notes in the passage. You can still use that technique. It's just two black notes or keys can't appear in succession. So that further clarifies, that example further clarifies the rule. And with the AC fingering, instead of the 4, you'd use 5. And on the F sharp, instead of the 3, you'd use 4. And then on the G, you'd use 5. And you'd keep going like that, crossing the fourth finger over the little finger, as opposed to the third finger over the fourth finger. And Bach says that when he compares it with B, here you can see in B he's talking about how according to the rule in the 33rd paragraph, that when ascending the right hand, the thumb follows one or more black keys, that the thumb will pass under in accordance. And he says that the second finger crossing over the thumb is more, and then he uses the word brauchbar, and brauchbar can be translated as useful, efficient, or reliable. Those are 3 possible translations of brauchbar. So he's saying the crossing the second finger over the thumb is more efficient, useful, or reliable than crossing the third finger over the fourth finger. Now, ideally, when you encounter something like that, where Bach says that there would be 2 questions you'd be asking. And the first question would be, is it? And the second question would be, why? And to answer the first question, the only way you can answer that in terms of you being the only authority you can rely on, or the only authority that's relevant at the end of the day. The only way to answer is to try it yourself and see what you experience. And that goes the same for the AC fingering system. And I would say that the AC fingering system, where the fourth finger is crossing over the fifth in that musical example, example A, that is more reliable and efficient than the third finger crossing over the fourth finger. And even, perhaps, not really though, the second finger crossing over the thumb. So you could try that. The only way to discover is to try it yourself. And you can try as well the AC fingering system, and you could be, even if you don't like the AC fingering system, or you don't think I should be coming along with a fingering system that's better than normal fingering. Well, in order to be 100% certain that mine is wrong, my fingering system is wrong, and normal fingering is right, you need to try it before you can be 100% certain that you can safely say, mine is wrong. So that example B with the AC fingering system, there'd be different, various examples, but you would not use the third finger on the F sharp, and you would not use the fourth finger on the white key. And as for the question why, it's in understanding why. That's where the real wisdom is. And that's the key to achieving your goals. And the AC fingering system, how I've introduced it, and the principles on which it's founded can perhaps help answer that question why. But I think very often in actually seeing, in being able to see things how they actually are, therein most of the time that's where you'll find the answer to the question why, is when you can see things as they are and recognize them as they are, and not as how they're perceived to be, or how it's said you should understand them or observe them. It's like when you're using normal fingering, you think you're right, you think you're safe, and when if you're teaching and you tell your student to play the key of C major with normal fingering, you're not actually noticing what that fingering is like. You just see, yes, there it is, and it's correct. And so you label it and understand it as being correct. So what you're seeing is correct. And you're not noticing anything else. You're just noticing that this equals correct. So everything you feel equals correct. And you might feel unpleasant things. You might feel like it doesn't work. You might feel that it's shaky. You might feel that it's bumpy, uneven, all these things. But that equals correct. So you don't notice. All the bumpiness is something else than it actually is. The bumpiness is down to you not practicing well enough, not being talented enough. All these things, needing more experience. But it's attributed. It's not seen as that being what it is. So again, the answer to the question why lies in observing what actually happens and noticing it without dismissing it or passing it off as something it's not, like being correct or incorrect. That is nothing, correct and incorrect. Each exists in reality, and you need to notice how they exist in reality. And correct and incorrect doesn't cover it. It doesn't come close to describing what you're actually noticing, what you're observing. Just looking at the G major ascending scale again, I just wanted to say that the normal fingering would be usable in accordance with the AC fingering system. So that could be a pattern you could come up with using the AC fingering system. And you can see, like with the C till the F sharp part of the scale being using 1, 2, 3 and 4, how as the black and white keys work out under the fingers, that when you use your thumb on C and the third finger on E and the fourth finger on F sharp, there's then room for the second finger on the D. So then you would use the second finger on the D. And with the AC fingering system, you could use that, but you might use 1, 3 and 5 on the G, A and B as an alternative. All these possibilities are open with the AC fingering system. G-Dur im Absteigen erscheint bei Finger 10 ebenfalls mit dreierlei Ordnungen der Finger. Die, wo der Daumen ins C steigt, ist ohne Zweifel die ungewöhnlichste. Die von den Noten entfernteste, die gefährlichste. Alle drei aber brauchbar. G major, descending. And you can see again the one he says where the thumb is on this, used on the C, that would be normal fingering, and that again is what he says is the least common of all of them. And I just want to note that with the ascending G major scale, just in connection with that rule he introduced in paragraph 33, that the left hand doesn't adhere or comply with that rule. The right hand does comply with the rule, but the left hand doesn't. The only ascending, so that rule would be that the thumb on the left hand is used before one or more black notes. And the only time that occurs is on that version that's furthest from the notes. And with G major descending, the left hand, that the rule in the 33rd paragraph would say that the thumb comes after one or more black notes when descending, and neither three versions that Bach provides adheres to that rule. And on the right hand, they all adhere to that rule. Here are possible fingerings for the G major scale with using the AC fingering system. And I've only written it out 3 octaves for space, and I didn't get down to the low G, but the continuation is the same, so you could extrapolate to the end easily. And again, the fingering, it doesn't matter if you're playing 4 octaves. I'm going to demonstrate this in 4 octaves. The fingering stays the same. And that fingering that's directly above and below the notes, I have it marked A. Those 2 fingerings will go together. And this is a version of the AC fingering system. If you think of it in levels, the way with the formula, the fingers have their primary function and secondary function. And so that version directly above and below the notes, that is using the fingers with where each finger is being used with its primary function. So it's only doing the jobs it can do best. And as well, it says in keeping with the C major scale using only 1, 3 and 5, it is employing the entire hand in order to play the scale. And since the AC fingering system is governed by a formula, you can use the formula to come up with any way of fingering you like for G major. So these are just possible versions, but they're not the only ways to finger the scale of G major. And if you look at the numbers, and if you consider the hands as being the mirror image of one another, and the third finger being the pivot, like this, if you superimpose them, or whatever that's called, hold them next to each other, you can see that the fourth finger and the second finger go together. The middle finger goes together. The second finger and the fourth finger goes together. The thumb and the little finger goes together on each hand. So, and if you observe those fingerings and think of it as an equation, you might see that the hands are perfectly balanced. And the same goes for B. If you the next fingering between, on the right hand, the one in the middle, and the one in the middle on the left hand, they as well go together. And you can see there again how the balance is perfectly struck with the AC fingering. And this is a level of balance that normal fingering does not achieve in the scales. And it would be legitimate to be curious about how, when your hands are perfectly balanced, how that manifests itself in the actual playing of the scale. What effect does that have on the playing of the scales when your hands are perfectly balanced and perfectly coordinated? So that might be a reason to be curious, to try it for yourself and see how it feels. Now the one on the right hand furthest from the notes, there's the normal fingering. I included that as well as a option. Like I said, there'd be more options than just these. These are just ones I've provided. And you could play the one on the left hand furthest from the notes. I just added that as a sort of a left hand version of that pattern of fingering or way of fingering the scale. You could try the fingering directly below the notes together with that normal version of fingering with the right hand, and see how they feel together. And you might notice the second finger on the F sharp in the left hand and the fourth finger on the F sharp in the right hand. This is another element of fingering. If you've tried that and notice a difference, you might see that not every fingering on the left hand is going to complement the fingering on the right hand. So an extra consideration when deciding upon a fingering is how they complement each other. And if you try that normal fingering with the fingering on the left hand furthest from the notes and then with the one directly under the notes, you will experience the difference in how they complement the right hand fingering. E-Moll im Aufsteigen hat nur diese einzige gute Applikatur. Figur 11. Wer, anstatt den Daumen in die Quinte H, solchen in die Quarte A setzen wollte, müsste solches bei Exempeln tun, wo die Folge dieses erfordert. Sonsten ist diese Fingersetzung nicht anzuraten. Man hüte sich bei diesem durch eine ganze Oktave aufsteigenden E-Moll, dass man den Daumen nicht ins G nach der in gedachten 33. Paragraph gegebenen Regel einsetzt, weil man sonst nicht mit den Fingern auskäme. Diese sonst so gewisse Regel leidet, wie wir in der Folge sehen werden, nur ein paar Ausnahmen, welche gegen den Nutzen, den diese Regel übrigens in der ganzen Lehre der Applikatur schafft, nichts bedeuten wollen. So here is E minor ascending with the two sets of fingerings for the left and right hand. And this is the same. This goes back to that the 33rd paragraph for A minor ascending. And he uses the same fingering as that which he says is the best for A minor. And this time with E minor, he alludes to the other fingering, which would be the same as the A minor fingering that he added as a warning. He doesn't include that version at all this time. He only alludes to it, and he says it's not advisable. And he says, you'd only use it if the succession or the continuation requires it. And if you think back at the example that was provided for that secondary A minor fingering, you might again think of an example that skips those black keys and where there's a stretch after the A, where you'd inserted the thumb on the A in order to comfortably play that stretch. So here, in one way he stays consistent in that he sticks to what he says is the best for A minor, he as well says is the best for E minor. And that same characteristic of what makes the A minor one the best is here that makes the E minor one the best. And that is the thumb being inserted on the B before the two black keys, the C sharp and D sharp. And then it's inserted after again. And in this paragraph, he says, he has to say that you can't use the rule that when ascending, the thumb comes after black keys. You can't use it because you'd run out of fingers. You wouldn't manage with the fingers if you put the thumb on the G after the F sharp. So you have to ignore that rule, but it doesn't take away from the good that rule creates or provides. And this consistency, however, compounds the inconsistency for the fingering he supplied for A major, where the thumb is inserted on the D after the C sharp in accordance to the rule, but it sets up that unnatural situation where you have the B or you have the E following with two black keys coming next, the F sharp and G sharp. And you can see it on the E minor with the thumb on the A, you again create that unnatural situation that would be created with a B following and two black keys coming after that. So the thumb, what's natural is the thumb wanting on the B before the black keys. So, and I said as well in that video where I covered the 33rd paragraph, that with the AC fingering system it would rather be the opposite, that the thumb would rather come before the black keys. And here Bach's instinct is pulling him into the direction of the AC fingering system. And the rule is causing him to falter. And it's forcing him to be inconsistent, and his instinct is pulling him in another direction away from that rule. And I would say that what he says is true, that the good that this rule creates, all those exceptions to the rule don't mean anything compared to the good. And what I say about this rule is that the idea is correct, but the formulation or the implementation of it is wrong. And that the value is that that the thumb is used when ascending before the black keys. And the only reason it's used after, as the rule goes, when ascending after black keys, is that erroneous idea that the thumb is used instead of the little finger. And this is a mistake that everybody makes, and the AC fingering has discovered, has spotted this error and has rectified it. And the thumb coming after the black keys is only, it's taking over from the little finger. And like I said in that video, that's bad management, because the little finger is as good as any other finger at playing the white keys. So that rule has been kind of falsely created, because it's mixing up the thumb being used instead of the little finger, and that is hiding the place where it really belongs, and that is when ascending before the black keys. And his instinct is telling him, yes, this is good. The thumb coming before the black keys is good, where in those two scales, A minor and E minor, he both preference that. But the rule gets it wrong. The rule is mistaking the thumb replacing the little finger, which the AC fingering has discovered is wrong. It shouldn't be doing it. The thumb should not be replacing the little finger. The little finger should not be left out. And the thumb should be used before one or more black keys when ascending. Again, the AC fingering doesn't need rules because it has a formula governing it. That eliminates the need for rules, but if there was a rule, it would come before. So here we saw in the G major scale, ascending and descending, that the hands didn't comply to that rule in the paragraph. That here he says you can't comply to that rule, otherwise you wouldn't manage with the fingers. So the rule is constantly undermining him, and it's because there's a flaw in the rule. The idea is correct. That's what's so difficult, why Bach can't dismiss the rule, because his instinct tells him the idea is right and he notices the value of it. But it's that mistaken belief that the thumb should replace the little finger is what causes this rule to falter constantly and force him to be inconsistent. But his instinct is better. You'll see where, and this is another good case of what I said about that commandment, I am the Lord your God, you should not have false gods before me. If you're a teacher and you see Bach's rule and you think what'll make you a better teacher is if you make your students obey that rule more than any other piano students obey it with any other teacher. And so you will, so where some people observe it some of the time, you'll have your students observe it all the time without exception, and that'll make you a better player or a better teacher, and it'll make them better players. And you can see there that you can start doing absurd things when you make that rule your one true God. And you can see here that Bach doesn't. Bach doesn't make it the be-all and end-all. And here's the AC fingering. A version of AC fingering you could use for that scale. And you will see that in not substituting the thumb for the little finger, it creates the natural use of the thumb and the natural position of the thumb. And the thumb ending up in the wrong position is down to that mistaken idea that the thumb should replace the little finger. So the thumb is always in the wrong position, which makes scales difficult and sound bad. And the AC fingering has not needed to be inconsistent so far. And as well with the E minor scale ascending and the A minor scale ascending, that the one he includes, the fingering he includes with the A minor scale is a warning, and the one he doesn't include with the E minor ascending but that he alludes to would be the same as normal fingering. Would be that fingering that educational institutions would have, or as teachers would have their students playing or professors. And if you think, again, you know, you don't like the AC fingering system, and you think you're on the side of, you know, you're safe, and everybody's on your side, you can see here that Bach does not represent normal fingering, and he's not on the side of normal fingering. He advises against, he would disapprove of that fingering that's expected of their students in examinations to play the E minor scale or the A minor scale. He'd disapprove of it. So if you think normal fingering is beyond reproach, there's Exhibit A. It is not. Bach will not endorse that aspect of it. And given and that can be seen in connection with what he has said about normal fingering being the least common, the least usual. In the other paragraphs. Einmal im Absteigen sehen wir bei Figur 12 mit zweierlei Fingersetzungen, wovon die nächst über und unter den Noten die beste ist. In this E minor ascending, the left hand agrees with the principal rule that he introduced on the 33rd paragraph, but the right hand doesn't. And yeah, and with you can do an AC version of the right hand fingering directly above the notes, where you'd use the fifth finger instead of the fourth on the E, and the fifth finger instead of the fourth on the A. F-Dur im Aufsteigen hat im Diskante nur eine gute Applikatur, laut Figur 8. Hergegen sind im Basse 3, welche in gewisser Art alle brauchbar und deswegen wert sind, dass man sie übt. So here's the scale. With the right hand complies to that rule in the 33rd paragraph, and in the left hand it's on the middle set of fingerings doesn't comply. The one directly below the notes and the one furthest from the notes, they both comply to the rule, but the middle one doesn't. And that fingering as well can be used with the AC fingering system on the right hand. I have here again versions of fingering with the AC fingering system that you could use for F major. And again, they are two of those, the ones directly above the notes, above and below the notes. And and then the other two, they go together. I have labeled them A and B. You can play them together. Again, you can notice how the level of absolute balance they achieve, and how the decision, how one fingering can complement the other, and not all work together. Some as well, when playing, you know, hands separately, or you have a passage in the left hand on its own, you'll choose a different fingering than when the hands are playing together in unison. All these factors come into play when deciding what fingering you use. And the one I've labelled C, furthest from the notes on the right hand, you can see that's the normal fingering, and that can be used with the AC fingering system. And I would play the fingering directly below the notes on the left hand with it. If you do everything I've been saying in my videos and you try that, what you will be discovering is the effect of that balance has on your playing. You will be discovering how well the scales work. The results you achieve without the metronome, without counting out loud, without months of disciplined practice, you will see how that actually works. And the people who choose the AC fingering system, they'll be the selfish ones, because they'll be choosing it because all they're interested in is how good a player they become or they are. And when you're interested in that, you will pick the AC fingering system because it makes you a better player. And though anybody who doesn't pick it, might not want other people to lose out who haven't come up with the AC fingering system, and they might be happy to see established people get it, and they're being selfless because they don't care about themselves, they don't care about their own playing, so they're happy to see other people get something out of it rather than me. But if you're selfish, you won't care about any of that, because you'll only care about your own playing and about being a great player and being a better player than everybody else. But then again, at the end of the day, that doesn't matter either, because you are going to want to, for yourself, play as good as possible. F-Dur im Absteigen zeigt sich bei Figur 14 im Diskante mit zweien und im Basse mit dreien Applikaturen. Die nächst über und unter den Noten sind die gewöhnlichsten. In den anderen ist nichts Unregelmäßiges. Sie können bei gewissen Fällen notwendig sein. Folglich kann man sie dabei mitmerken. So there is F major, descending, with 2 versions for the right hand and 3 for the left hand. And here the right hand versions comply with the principal rule on the 33rd paragraph. And on the left hand, it's only the one furthest from the notes that complies with that principal rule. The other 2 don't. Die Moll im Aufsteigen bei Figur 15 hat für jede Hand dreierlei Fingersetzung, welche alle gut und zu üben sind, ungeachtet, dass die von den Noten entfernteste etwas ungewöhnlicher als die anderen ist. So here's D minor ascending, and you can see the one furthest from the notes that he says is less usual than, somewhat more unusual or less common than the rest, is what would be the normal fingering of the D minor scale. So you can see there's a pattern there, and if you have pledged allegiance to normal fingering, and if you think Bach is on your side, well, you could be mistaken. And here I say that the right hand adheres, all those versions on the right hand adhere to the rule in the 33rd paragraph. On the left hand, however, it's only the middle fingering he supplies that adheres to that principal rule. D-Moll im Absteigen finden wir bei Figur 16 mit zweierlei Arten von Setzung der Finger für jede Hand. Die beiden, welche am weitesten von den Noten entfernt stehen, sind wegen des vorkommenden halben Tones nicht die besten, welche hier gerne den Daumen in das A verlangt. So here is D minor descending. And he says the fingerings furthest from the note on each hand are, because of the black key, the B flat, they're not the best. And he says that the thumb wants on the A because of the black key. And here, neither version on the right hand adheres to that rule in the 33rd paragraph. And in the left hand, it's only the one directly beneath the notes that complies. The other one doesn't. And you'll see the ones he says are the best, where the thumb wants to go on the A. The rule says that when descending, the thumb wants to go before one or more black keys on the right hand. And like I said, with the AC fingering system, it's rather the opposite. And this is exactly opposite to the rule. And he commends the thumb coming after the B flat. He says the thumb wants to go on that A after the B flat when descending. So the thumb is coming after the black key when descending and not before the black keys. Again, he's being pulled in the direction of the AC fingering. His instinct knows to ignore the rule and do what is natural, do what feels right, do what works well, because all this translates into the results you have in your playing. So it's completely contrary to that principal rule, whereas he's agreeing with the AC fingering system. His instinct is always pulling him towards that AC fingering system, because the AC fingering system is the correct answer, and I'm pointing out the flaws that normal fingering is based on, resulting in an inferior result. The AC fingering system has corrected those flaws and is a superior answer. B-Dur hat nur diese einzige bei Finger 17 angemerkte Applikatur sowohl im Auf- als Absteigen. So here is the fingering for B major that Bach provides, and both right hand and left hand adhere to that rule in the 33rd paragraph. B flat major is not an easy scale to play, and with the position of the black keys, it doesn't fit well on the hands. And you might notice that when you play B flat major with normal fingering, that it's a difficult one. And if you have looked at that video where I introduced the AC fingering and talk about alternating the keys, and the fact that whether it causes tension or not, you can dispute, but that it requires more movement, that is irrefutable. That is undeniable. And you can see how with that fingering, how the fingers are forced to alternate between black and white keys. The second finger has to change from the B flat to the D, the third finger from the E flat to the A, which will cause for unevenness and tension. And here is a version of B flat major with the AC fingering system. And with regards to the left hand, when playing B flat major on its own, you would not use that fingering that I supplied here. You would choose a different one. There are other ways with the AC fingering system that you can play B flat major. And if you're playing the left hand on its own, I would not recommend that one. And of course, you'll get to the position yourself where you know, and you can make the decision, and you have so many, you're applying the formula, so you can apply the formula any way it works, and so you'll have lots of options to choose from, and you'll be able to try them all and pick the best one. And given the consistency with the formula, and that there's a consistency in the way the fingers are applied, it's easy to switch from one fingering to another. You're not a slave to the one where you spend months learning a fingering, and then the idea of using any other fingering is horrific, because it would mean, again, months trying to get that new fingering into your, into your head and into your fingers. With the AC fingering system, you can alternate fingerings very easily, because they're not individual fingerings. It's a pattern. It's a system that's applied all the time. So the pattern of the fingers might change, but the system doesn't. And it's the system you're using. You're not dealing in patterns. You're dealing in a system. So that's it. I'll get through more in the next video, and we'll get through the scales. And so yeah, it looks like that principal rule is inconsistent. It has the right idea, but it's been conceived incorrectly. And me doing that, this is not an ego trip for me. I'm looking at it objectively, and I'm presenting what Bach says in its entirety, so you can make up your own mind. You can as well look objectively and decide for yourself whatever it is, come to your own conclusion. So you don't have to believe me. I would want, especially given the fact that I have come up with the right answer, I would definitely want you to examine that yourself objectively and come to a conclusion. So you can agree with Bach and think I'm the one who's wrong. Everything is there. You can learn from what I've provided, from what Bach says. Because Bach is this inconsistency in the rule it does not mean anything when it comes to Bach. It doesn't lessen him in any way. Let's say I'm right. It doesn't lessen him in any way. His instinct is still beyond that of most people. Most people adhere to normal fingering without any question, without any hesitation or moment of doubt, thinking, oops, what if it's wrong? What if this doesn't work? Bach's instinct tells him when to ignore the rule, when to follow it. He knows, his instinct tells him there's truth to the rule as well, and that's why he can't dismiss it completely. That's why I'd love to talk to him about fingering. And one last thing. When, Beethoven had his nephew Carl play scales, he thought he'd make Carl a virtuoso when he kind of became his guardian. And you can see this is these scales are what Beethoven, these fingerings, these this approach to scales is what Beethoven will have wanted Carl to learn. So these are ways of playing ideas in, not necessarily, I'm just, you could gather from it that they're ways of playing musical ideas in those keys as opposed to the scales as just scales themselves, and that is the value in these scales and in learning these fingerings, that you can apply them to musical ideas. And that seems to be, I know from my experience in the educational institutions, that scales are just something to be learned. And it's very often people will have heard people question, when do you need scales? In what piece does a scale appear outside of certain Mozart pieces you might think of? But generally, that will have been an argument of, of sort of voice of protest against scales, is when do they ever occur in pieces? So, yeah, just stuff to think about. Okay, thanks. Bye.